The woman standing in the snow outside my door wasn't lost. She wasn't selling anything. She was here to collect. At 8:17 on a freezing Sunday morning in Aspen, Colorado, when the world was buried under fresh white silence, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. I hadn't seen her in 20 years. Not since we were 17. Not since the promise. She looked the same, only sharper, colder, successful in ways I'd only read about in magazines. And when she stepped onto my porch, snow melting at her heels, she said just one sentence. "You told me that if we both turned 40 and still felt empty, you would come find me. But I'm getting ahead of myself." The morning began like every other winter Sunday in our small wooden cabin at the edge of Aspen. I woke at 5:47, 3 minutes before my alarm. The kind of waking that comes from habit, not rest. Outside the bedroom window, snow fell in thick, lazy spirals, coating the pines until their branches drooped under the weight. I padded downstairs in wool socks, the floorboards cold even through the fabric. The living room was dim, lit only by the embers still glowing in the fireplace from last night. I added 2 logs, watched the flames catch, then moved to the kitchen. Pancake mix, eggs, blueberries that Sophie liked. My daughter was still asleep upstairs, her breathing soft and steady in the room directly above mine. 10 years old. 4th grade. She had my dark hair and her mother's green eyes, though her mother hadn't lived here in 2 years. The divorce had been civil. Painfully civil. No shouting, no throwing things. Just 2 people who realized they'd built a life on a foundation of should rather than want. Claire got the house in Denver. I got the cabin and custody. Sophie spent alternating weeks between 2 homes that felt equally incomplete. I flipped pancakes mechanically, watching the batter bubble and brown. Steam rose from the griddle. Outside, the world was silent except for the occasional crack of a branch releasing its burden of snow. This was my life now. Quiet, predictable, safe. I worked remotely as a software consultant, took Sophie to her ski lessons on Saturdays, cooked meals that she half ate while doing homework, and went to bed each night wondering if this was all there was. 43 years old. Financially stable. Emotionally numb. The kind of numb that doesn't hurt because you've forgotten what feeling alive was like. Sophie appeared at the bottom of the stairs, hair mussed, wearing her favorite flannel pajamas with the moose pattern. She rubbed her eyes. "Morning, sweetheart. Pancakes in 5. She climbed onto a bar stool at the kitchen island, reaching for the orange juice I'd already poured. "Can we build a fort today? With the new snow? If you finish your math homework first. Deal." She grinned, and for a moment, the emptiness retreated. This was enough. It had to be enough. A good daughter, a warm home, work that paid the bills. What else did a man need? Then the doorbell rang. At 8:17 inches the morning, during a snowstorm. In Aspen, where our nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. Sophie looked up, surprised. Who would come over now? I set down the spatula, wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Stay here." Through the front window, I could see the black SUV, its engine still running, exhaust rising in white plumes. Expensive. Rental, probably. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong on our gravel road. I opened the door, and 20 years collapsed into a single breath. She stood on my porch in a charcoal cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was older, but not in a way that diminished her. She'd grown into the sharp cheekbones that had seemed too prominent at 17. Her eyes were the same pale gray I remembered. Emma Whitmore. My hands went numb, and it had nothing to do with the cold air pouring through the open door. "Daniel." Her voice was calm, professional, like she was opening a board meeting. I couldn't speak. My brain was trying to reconcile the teenager I'd loved with the woman standing in front of me, snow melting on her expensive coat. "You're wondering why I'm here," she said. I managed a nod. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. aged paper, yellowed at the edges. My handwriting on the front, though I didn't remember writing it. "You told me," she said slowly, each word measured, "that if we both turned 40 and still felt empty, you would come find me." The world tilted slightly. "But you didn't come," she continued. "So I came to you." "Dad?" Sophie's voice behind me was small, uncertain. "Who is that?" I turned. My daughter stood 5 feet away, holding her orange juice, staring at the stranger in our doorway. Emma's expression shifted. Just for a second, something soft crossed her face before the professional mask returned. "Hi," Emma said to Sophie. "I'm an old friend of your father's, from high school." Sophie looked between us, her 10-year-old instincts sensing something bigger than a simple reunion. The question hung there. I should have been the one to ask. I should have said something, anything. But my throat felt like it was filled with glass. Emma met my eyes. "May I?" I stepped aside. She moved past me into the warmth of the cabin, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and cold air. She unbuttoned her coat but didn't take it off. This wasn't a social visit. She wasn't planning to stay. Sophie set down her juice. "I'm Sophie. Emma." They shook hands, which seemed absurdly formal and made Sophie smile a little. "The pancakes are burning," Sophie said, glancing toward the kitchen. I jolted back to reality, rushing to the stove. The top pancake was dark brown, smoking slightly. I flipped it onto a plate, turned off the burner. My hands were shaking. Emma stood in the living room, her coat still buttoned, looking around at the modest space. The worn furniture, the photographs on the mantel, the life I'd built that suddenly felt small and exposed under her gaze. "You have a beautiful home," she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant it. "Coffee?" The word came out hoarse. "Please." I poured 3 cups, though Sophie usually didn't drink coffee. She took hers anyway, sitting at the kitchen island and watching Emma with open curiosity. Emma sat across from her, the envelope still in her hand. She placed it on the counter between us. "We made a promise," she said quietly. "In a letter." I stared at the envelope. I didn't remember writing it, but I remembered the night we talked about it. Senior year, sitting on the hood of her beaten-up Honda in the school parking lot, staring at stars, talking about futures that felt impossibly far away. "We were 17, I said. "We were honest," she replied. "What does the letter say?" Sophie asked. Emma looked at me, waiting for permission. I nodded, numb. She opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. My handwriting from 2 decades ago stared back at me. Emma's voice was steady as she read aloud. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means we're both 40. It means we went our separate ways like we planned. You're probably in New York or Boston, running some company, changing the world. I'm probably in Colorado or Montana, doing something quiet with computers. But here's the thing I need you to know. If we're both 40 and we're both still looking for whatever it was we felt when we were together, that thing that made everything else make sense, then maybe we were wrong to let it go. So if you're reading this and you're still empty, come find me. Or I'll come find you. Whichever happens first. We owe ourselves that much. Daniel." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break bones. Sophie's eyes were wide. She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Emma folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. "I've been carrying this for 3 years. Since I turned 40, I almost came then. But I thought, maybe you'd come first, like you promised." "I didn't remember," I said, which sounded pathetic even as I said it. Didn't remember, or didn't want to? I had no answer for that. Emma stood, pacing to the window. Snow was falling harder now, coating the world in white. "I built everything I said I would. My company uses AI to predict patient outcomes in hospitals. We've saved thousands of lives. I've been on magazine covers. I've spoken at conferences in 12 countries." She turned to face me. "And every night, I go home to a penthouse in Manhattan where nobody's waiting." I eat takeout at a marble counter that cost $40,000. I sleep in a king-sized bed by myself. And I wake up and do it all again. The rawness in her voice made my chest ache. I thought success would fill it, she continued. The emptiness. But it just made the space bigger. Sophie was watching Emma with something like recognition, as if she understood something I didn't. What about you? Emma asked me. Are you happy, Daniel? I wanted to lie. To tell her that yes, I was perfectly content with my quiet life and my daughter and my safe, predictable routine. But Sophie was sitting right there, and if I lied, she would know. No, I said finally. I'm not. Emma nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she already knew. I got married, I said, the words coming faster now. 6 years ago. To a woman my mother approved of. She worked in finance. We had Sophie. We bought a house in Denver. We did everything right, and it was a lie. Not the marriage itself, but the reason for it. I married her because she was safe, because she made sense on paper, because I was tired of wondering, what if? Emma's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. We divorced 2 years ago, I continued. Claire's happy now, I think. She's dating someone who actually loves her the way she deserves. And I moved here with Sophie, and we're fine. Fine, Emma repeated. Yeah, fine. Sophie set down her coffee cup with a small clink. Both Emma and I looked at her. My teacher says, Sophie began carefully, that fine is what you say when you don't want to admit something hurts. The words landed like a punch. Emma smiled, and it was the first genuine expression I'd seen on her face since she arrived. Your daughter is very wise. She gets that from her mother, I said. I doubt that, Sophie muttered, which surprised a laugh out of me despite everything. Emma moved back to the counter, her fingertips resting on the envelope. I didn't come here to ruin your life, Daniel. I came because I needed to know if I was the only one still carrying this, if I was the only one who never figured out how to let go. You're not, I said quietly. Sophie looked between us, her young face serious. Of course, Emma said. Did you love each other? Like, really love each other? Emma and I exchanged a look. 20 years dissolved. I could see her at 17 again, laughing in the rain after a football game. Her hair soaked, her eyes bright with something that felt like forever. Yes, Emma said softly. Sophie nodded, processing this. Then she said something that changed everything. Then why are you both afraid to try again? Emma stared at my daughter, caught off guard for the first time since she'd arrived. I could see her carefully constructed composure fracture slightly. It's not that simple, Emma said. Why not? Sophie pressed. She had this way of asking questions that cut straight through to the truth. It drove her teachers crazy. It drove me crazy. Right now, it was absolutely necessary. Emma sat back down, and this time she unbuttoned her coat. A small surrender. Because 20 years is a long time, Emma said, speaking to Sophie but looking at me. People change. Lives get complicated. You can't just pick up where you left off. I'm not saying you should, Sophie said. I'm saying maybe you could start over. From here. The simplicity of it was almost offensive. As if 2 decades of separation, of different lives and different choices, could be bridged by just deciding to try. But Sophie was looking at me now, and there was something in her expression that made my throat tight. Dad, she said quietly, you've been sad since Mom left. You don't think I notice, but I do. You make breakfast and drive me to school and help with homework, and you're always there. But you're not really here. Not all the way. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But the truth was a weight in my chest. I'm sorry, I managed. Don't be sorry, Sophie said. Just don't be scared. Emma was watching this exchange with something close to wonder. How old are you? She asked Sophie. You're much smarter than I was at 10. Thanks. Did you really never get married? The directness of it made me wince, but Emma didn't seem bothered. No, she said. I came close once, a venture capitalist named Richard. We were engaged for 14 months. He was brilliant and ambitious, and we made sense together. But he wasn't Daniel. The words hung in the air. Sophie looked at me with an expression that said, "See? See what you're both doing?" "Emma," I said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing here?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "I don't know. I drove here from the Denver airport with no plan. I just knew I had to see you, to know if the promise meant anything." "It means something," I said. "What?" "I don't know yet." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the crackling of the fire and the muffled weight of snow on the roof. Emma pulled out her phone, checked something, then set it face down on the counter. "I have meetings tomorrow. A board presentation on Tuesday. I should fly back tonight." "You drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to stay for 20 minutes?" Sophie asked. Emma smiled sadly. "I've made worse decisions." But she didn't move to leave. Sophie got up, walked around the counter, and stood in front of Emma. "My dad is a really good person. He makes terrible pancakes sometimes, and he doesn't know how to braid hair, and he listens to old music that nobody likes. But he's the best dad anyone could have." Emma's eyes were bright. "I believe you. He's also really lonely," Sophie continued, "even though he tries to hide it. And I think you're lonely too. So maybe—" She paused, choosing her words. "Maybe you could try not being lonely together. Just to see what happens." I stood frozen, pride and terror warring in my chest. Pride that my daughter could be so brave, terror that she was right. Emma looked up at me. "Is that what you want?" The question was so direct it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "I don't know if I remember how," I said honestly. "To what?" "To not be afraid of this." Emma stood, and we were suddenly close enough that I could see the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, the silver threads in her hair that she hadn't bothered to hide. She was 43. I was 43. We weren't kids anymore. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I control billion-dollar decisions. I manage hundreds of employees. I speak in front of thousands of people, and standing in your kitchen right now is the scariest thing I've done in years. Because this matters. Everything else, it's just work. But this—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sophie was still standing between us, looking up with an expression far too knowing for a 10-year-old. "You're both using fancy words to avoid saying something simple," she observed. "What's that?" Emma asked. "That you miss each other." The truth of it was like a bell ringing in an empty room. Emma's professional mask slipped completely. She sat down heavily, like the weight of admission had taken her strength. "I've missed you every day for 20 years, she said to me, "even when I was succeeding, even when I should have been happy. There was always this gap." I pulled out the chair beside her, my legs suddenly unsteady. I convinced myself I was over it. Over you. "That teenage love wasn't real love, was it?" Emma asked. "Real love? I married the wrong woman to try to prove it wasn't." Emma flinched. "That's not fair to her." "No, it wasn't. That's why she left. She said I was always waiting for something that would never come. And she was right." Sophie moved to the living room, giving us space while still being close enough to hear. She curled up in the armchair by the fire, pretending to look at a book. Emma's hand was on the counter, inches from mine. I could see the faint scar on her thumb from when she'd cut it on a fence junior year. Some things didn't change. "I need to tell you something," Emma said quietly. "About why I never came back before. Why it took me 3 years after turning 40 to show up." I waited. "I was angry," she said. "At you, at your family, at the choice you made." The memory rushed back. My mother's voice. "She's not our kind, Daniel. A scholarship girl with no family money, no connections. You'll throw away Princeton for what? A teenage infatuation?" And I'd believed her. I'd chosen the scholarship, the prestigious school, the safe path. I'd left Emma behind. "I should have fought harder," I said. "You were 17. Your family had power over you. I understood that, but it still hurt. I know. For years, I used that hurt as fuel. I built my company to prove I was worth more than your mother thought. That I could be more successful than any Carter ever was. You succeeded. Yes. And then I realized success tastes like ashes when you have nobody to share it with. Emma turned to look at me fully. That's when I found the letter again. I'd kept it in a safety deposit box. I took it out on my 40th birthday, and I read it, and I realized I was still that angry girl trying to prove something to people who didn't matter anymore. So, what changed? I stopped being angry, and I started being honest with myself about what I actually wanted, which is, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked over at Sophie, who was definitely not reading her book, though she was making a good show of it. Can I ask you something? Emma said. About her. Anything. Are you worried I'd hurt her? By being here? By disrupting your life? I thought about it carefully. No, I'm worried I'd hurt both of you by being too damaged to do this right. Emma's laugh was soft, almost sad. Daniel, we're all damaged. That's not disqualifying. The question is whether we're brave enough to try anyway. Sophie's voice came from the armchair. Brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who are scared and do it anyway. Emma smiled. Where did you hear that? A book. But also, it's true. I looked at my daughter, at this person I'd helped create, who somehow had more wisdom than both of us combined. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always listen. Emma laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound filled something in me I didn't know was empty. Okay, Emma said, turning back to me. Here's what I propose. I cancel my flight. I stay in Aspen for a week. We spend time together, the three of us. We see if this is real or if it's just nostalgia. And if it's real? I asked. Then we figure out what comes next. And if it's not, then we'll finally have closure. Either way, we owe ourselves the truth. Sophie had set down her book completely now, watching us with barely contained hope. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. How Sophie could get attached and then hurt. How Emma could realize I wasn't worth leaving New York for. How I could fail at this the way I'd failed at my marriage. But I also thought about Sophie's words. The things worth doing are usually scary. 1 week, I said. Emma extended her hand. 1 week. We shook on it, formal and absurd, and Sophie cheered from her chair. Emma made a phone call to her assistant, asking her to reschedule meetings and push back the board presentation. I could hear the surprise in the assistant's voice, even from across the room. Apparently, Emma Whitmore didn't cancel things. I'll need a hotel recommendation, Emma said after she hung up. Sophie looked horrified. You're not staying here? Sophie, I said gently. Emma probably wants her own space. Actually, Emma said, I was trying to be appropriate. I don't want to impose. We have a guest room, Sophie said quickly. It's small, but it has a nice view of the mountains, and Dad just put new sheets on the bed last week because Grandma was supposed to visit, but then she canceled. The mention of my mother made Emma's expression tighten slightly, but she recovered quickly. If Daniel doesn't mind. I don't, I said, perhaps too quickly. So, it was settled. Emma would stay with us. The arrangement felt both monumental and mundane. A woman I'd loved 20 years ago, sleeping down the hall, making coffee in my kitchen, existing in my space. Sophie volunteered to help Emma get settled while I cleaned up the breakfast dishes. Through the ceiling, I could hear their voices, Sophie's bright and chattering, Emma's lower and measured but warming gradually. By the time they came back downstairs, Emma had changed out of her business attire into jeans and a cream-colored sweater. She looked younger, more like the girl I remembered. Sophie's giving me a full briefing on your life, Emma said, settling onto the couch. Apparently you can't cook anything except pancakes and pasta. That's not entirely true. He also makes pretty good grilled cheese, Sophie conceded. But that's basically it. Noted. I'll handle dinner, then. The casual domesticity of the statement hit me harder than it should have. Emma, cooking in my kitchen, as if she belonged here. We spent the afternoon in a strange, careful dance. Sophie wanted to build a snow fort, so we bundled up and went outside. Emma borrowed Claire's old winter coat from the closet, which fit her perfectly. We worked in the snow, building walls and tunnels, Sophie directing us like a tiny general. At one point, Emma and I reached for the same snowball at the same time, and our gloved hands touched. We both pulled back like we'd been burned. Sophie noticed. Of course, she noticed. "You're allowed to touch each other," she said, exasperated. "You're not strangers, but we kind of are," Emma said softly. "We've been apart longer than we were ever together, so get to know each other again. Simple, impossible, necessary." That evening, after Sophie went to bed, Emma and I sat by the fire with glasses of wine. The house was quiet except for the crackling logs and the wind outside. "This is nice," Emma said. "The peace, the quiet. I'd forgotten what it's like to not have constant noise. It can get lonely," I admitted. "Can it be both? Peaceful and lonely? That's my life, in a sentence." Emma turned to look at me, her face soft in the firelight. "What happened to us, Daniel?" "Really? We were young. I was a coward. You deserved better. I wasn't perfect either. I could have fought harder too. You were 17 and alone. I had my whole family pressuring me. It's not the same. Maybe not. But we both made choices. Are you worth being scared for?" I asked quietly. Emma smiled. "Only if you are." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. "1 week," Emma said again. "1 week," I agreed. But I think we both knew we were lying to ourselves. This was already more than that. The phone call came Tuesday morning. My mother's voice was bright with forced cheer, the kind she used when she was fishing for information. "Daniel, darling, I was thinking we haven't had a proper family dinner in weeks. Why don't you and Sophie come over this Sunday?" I hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was making coffee in the kitchen with an efficiency that suggested she'd memorized the layout in 2 days. "Can I bring someone?" I asked. Silence on the other end. Then, "Who?" "An old friend. From high school." More silence. My mother was calculating, trying to figure out if this was business or personal, important or trivial. "Of course," she said finally. "The more the merrier." "Who is it?" "You'll see Sunday." I hung up before she could interrogate further. Emma was watching me with an amused expression. That sounded ominous. "My mother's having Sunday dinner. I may have just invited you." "May have?" "Did." "I invited you." Emma's amusement faded. "Daniel, I don't think that's a good idea. Your family made their feelings about me very clear 20 years ago. 20 years is a long time. People change. Do they?" It was a fair question. My mother, Margaret Carter, was a formidable woman who valued tradition, propriety, and social standing above almost everything else. She'd been the one to point out that Emma came from nothing, a single mother who worked 2 jobs, a scholarship student who didn't summer anywhere or belong to the right clubs. The fact that Emma was brilliant and driven hadn't mattered to my mother. Only pedigree did. "They should see who you became," I said. "You mean they should see that I'm now successful enough to be acceptable?" The bitterness in her voice stung because it was accurate. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant, and I understand the impulse. But Daniel, I didn't come here to prove anything to your family. I came here for you." Sophie had been listening from the dining table, where she was supposedly doing homework. "I think you should come," she said. "Grandma can be kind of intense, but she makes really good pot roast, and maybe she'll be nicer now." Emma and I both looked at her. "Why would she be nicer now?" Emma asked. Sophie shrugged. "Because Dad is actually happy for the first time in forever, and Grandma wants Dad to be happy. She tells me that all the time." The simplicity of Sophie's logic was both endearing and naive, but there was something to it. My mother did want me to be happy, She just had very specific ideas about what that should look like. "Okay," Emma said finally. "I'll come." "What's that? If it gets ugly, we leave. I won't have Sophie sitting through her grandparents judging me over pot roast." "Deal." Sophie grinned. "It won't get ugly, probably." "Very reassuring," Emma said dryly. The rest of the week passed in a strange, suspended reality. Emma worked remotely, taking calls from the guest room, her voice sharp and commanding as she managed her company from 1,000 miles away. I worked from my home office, listening to her through the walls, marveling at how she could command a room she wasn't even in. In the evenings, we cooked together. Well, Emma cooked while I chopped vegetables and tried not to get in the way. Sophie did homework at the counter, occasionally offering commentary on our terrible knife skills or questionable seasoning choices. It felt like playing house, like we were pretending at something we weren't sure was real. But it also felt like coming home, and that terrified me more than anything. Sunday arrived too quickly. We drove to my parents' house in my 10-year-old Subaru, Emma sitting in the passenger seat while Sophie chattered nervously from the back. The Carter family home was a sprawling ranch-style house on 5 acres, with a circular driveway and a 3-car garage. It screamed old money. Though the truth was more modest, my grandfather had been a successful real estate developer, and my parents had inherited well. Emma stared at the house as we pulled up. I'd forgotten how big it was. "You've been here before?" "Once. Senior year. You invited me to a Christmas party. Your mother made it clear I wasn't welcome after 15 minutes. I didn't remember that. Or maybe I'd blocked it out. I'm sorry," I said. Ancient history. But the tension in her shoulders said otherwise. My mother answered the door in a burgundy cashmere sweater and pearl earrings, her silver hair styled perfectly. Her smile was warm until she saw who was standing next to me. Then it froze. "Emma Whitmore," my mother said slowly. "What a—" "Mrs. Carter, thank you for having me." The two women regarded each other like generals assessing enemy positions. Sophie broke the tension by hugging her grandmother. "Hi, Grandma. Emma's staying with us this week. She's a CEO. She runs a whole company." My mother's eyebrow arched. "Is that so?" We moved inside, where my father was pouring drinks in the living room. Thomas Carter was a quieter man than my mother, a retired accountant who mostly nodded along with whatever Margaret decided. He shook Emma's hand politely but said little. Dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd feared. My mother asked pointed questions about Emma's company, her home in New York, her situation, a word she used to mean relationship status without being direct about it. Emma answered with professional grace, revealing little, giving away nothing. Then my mother set down her wine glass and said, "I remember you, you know, from when you and Daniel were in high school." "I remember you too," Emma said evenly. "You were the scholarship girl." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. My mother looked surprised. "I'm simply stating a fact, sweetheart." "You're being mean," Sophie said firmly. "Emma is nice and smart, and she makes Dad happy. That's what matters." I'd never been prouder of my daughter. My mother's expression tightened. "Daniel, perhaps you could explain to your daughter that adults are having a conversation." "No," I said quietly. "Sophie's right. That was rude, Mom." My mother blinked. I'd never contradicted her so directly. "Emma came here because I asked her to," I continued. "Because 20 years ago, I made a choice I've regretted every day since. I let you convince me that she wasn't good enough for this family, that I should go to Princeton and marry someone from the right background and live the right kind of life. And you've done very well. I've been miserable, Mom. My marriage failed. I work a job I don't care about. I've spent 20 years being exactly what you wanted, and I've been empty the entire time." My father looked down at his plate. My mother's face had gone pale. "Emma is successful beyond anything you could have imagined," I said. "She built a company from nothing. She saved lives. She's brilliant and strong, and she did it all without family, money, or connections, or any of the things you thought mattered. Daniel, I'm not finished. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. I don't know if Emma and I have a future. Maybe we're 20 years too late. Maybe we've changed too much. But I'm going to find out. And this family is going to be respectful. Or Sophie and I won't be coming back. The silence was deafening. After dinner, Emma excused herself to the bathroom, and I knew she wasn't coming back to the table. I found her in the hallway, putting on her coat. I'm going to walk home, she said quietly. It's not far. It's 6 miles. In the snow. I need the air. Emma, your mother's right, Daniel. I don't belong here. I never did. And standing in that dining room, being looked at like I'm some kind of social experiment. I can't do it. I stood up for you. I know, and I appreciate it. But that's not the point. She turned to face me, and I could see tears in her eyes, which undid me completely. I spent 20 years proving I was good enough, building a company, making money, getting respect, and one dinner with your mother, and I'm 17 again, wearing a borrowed dress and wondering why I'm not enough. You've always been enough. More than enough. Not to her. She doesn't get to decide that. Emma zipped up her coat. I should go back to New York. This was a mistake. Panic clawed at my chest. No, please. Don't let her win. This isn't about winning. Then what's it about? It's about the fact that I came here looking for something, and I'm realizing it might not exist anymore. We're not 17, Daniel. We're middle-aged people with entire lives that don't fit together. Your family is here. Your daughter is here. My company is in New York. How does this work? I didn't have an answer. Emma reached for the door handle, and I did the only thing I could think of. I followed her. Outside, the night was brutally cold. Snow crunched under our feet as we walked down the long driveway, away from the warm house, away from my family. Emma, wait. She stopped, but didn't turn around. I caught up to her, my breath coming out in white clouds. You're right. I chose safe once. I chose what my mother wanted, what made sense on paper, and it destroyed my marriage and left me empty for 20 years. So I'm not choosing safe again. She turned then, her face illuminated by the porch lights behind us. Snow was falling softly, catching in her hair. What are you choosing? She asked. I don't know yet. But I know I can't let you walk away twice. I know that this week with you has been the most alive I've felt in 2 decades. I know that my daughter sees it too. Your daughter is 10. She doesn't understand how complicated this is. Maybe that's exactly why we should listen to her. Because she sees it simply. 2 people who care about each other trying to figure out if that's enough. Emma's breath hitched. Is it enough? I don't know. But I want to find out. A car door closed behind us. Sophie's voice called out. Are you 2 going to kiss, or just stand in the snow being dramatic? We both turned. Sophie was on the porch, wrapped in her coat, watching us with exasperated fondness. Emma laughed, and it broke the tension like a hammer through glass. Your daughter has terrible timing, she said. She really does. Emma looked at me, snow melting on her eyelashes. If we do this, if we really try, it's going to be hard. My life is in New York. Yours is here. I know. We might fail. I know. And it might hurt worse than the first time. I know. She reached out, her hand finding mine in the cold. I chose safe once too. I dated men who made sense, who fit in my world, who couldn't hurt me because I never really loved them. And I'm tired of being safe. I pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her arms wrapping around me. We stood there in the snow, holding each other like we were the only solid things in a shifting world. Then I kissed her, and it felt like coming home after 20 years of being lost. Sophie was grinning when we walked back to the house, hand in hand. Finally, she said, I thought I was going to have to draw you a diagram. A diagram of what? Emma asked, smiling. Of how feelings work. You 2 are really slow. We didn't go back inside to my parents. Instead, we got in the car and drove home to our cabin, where the lights were warm and the fire was waiting. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Emma and I sat on the couch, not talking, just existing in the same space. Her head was on my shoulder. My arm was around her waist. It felt both foreign and familiar, like a song you hadn't heard in years but still knew all the words to. "I have to go back to New York on Friday," Emma said, eventually. My chest tightened. "I know, but I've been thinking. My company has been looking to expand. We could open a Colorado office, Denver, maybe, or even here in Aspen. You'd do that? I'd consider it. If there was a reason to." "What kind of reason?" She lifted her head to look at me, the kind that makes pancakes and has terrible taste in music and raises incredibly wise daughters. I kissed her forehead. "That's a pretty good reason. What about you? Could you ever see yourself leaving here?" If it came to that, the question was harder than it should have been. This cabin, this town, this life, it was safe, predictable, but it was also lonely. "For the right person," I said carefully. "I could see it, but Sophie has 2 parents. And if Claire were willing to split custody more flexibly, maybe." We were talking in hypotheticals, dancing around the enormity of actually making this work, but we were talking, planning, hoping. "One day at a time?" Emma suggested. "One day at a time." The fire crackled. Outside, snow continued its silent fall. "I'm scared," Emma admitted. "This feels too good to be real." "It's real. How do you know?" "Because nothing else has ever felt like this." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've been running for 20 years, building things, achieving things, moving forward. I thought if I stopped I'd realize how empty it all was. But sitting here with you, I don't feel empty." "What do you feel?" "Full, terrified, hopeful." She laughed softly, like maybe I've been running toward something instead of away from it. "Toward what?" "This. You. The life I should have had if I'd been braver at 17. We're both braver now, are we?" I took her hand, lacing our fingers together. "We're here, aren't we? That takes courage." Through the window, I could see Sophie's light was still on upstairs. She was probably reading, or, more likely, listening to us through the floorboards. The thought made me smile. "She really is remarkable," Emma said, following my gaze. "You did a good job with her." "I had help. And a lot of luck. Do you think she'd be okay with this? I think she'd be heartbroken if we didn't." Emma rested her head back on my shoulder. "No pressure then." "None at all." We sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low. Outside, the world was white and clean and full of possibility. Inside, we were warm and uncertain and hopeful. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We had no guarantees. Emma would leave in 4 days. We'd have to figure out logistics and schedules and whether love from 2 decades ago could survive in the present day. But for now, in this moment, with snow falling and the fire glowing and Sophie safe upstairs, it was enough. More than enough. It was a beginning. Emma's flight was booked for Friday afternoon. We didn't talk about it much, but it hung over us like the snow clouds that kept rolling in. Instead, we focused on the present. Emma extended her stay through the weekend, claiming her assistant could handle the board meeting. I suspected there was more stress in that decision than she let on, but she seemed lighter somehow, less guarded. Thursday night, we sat at the kitchen table after Sophie went to bed, laptops open, having the conversation we'd been avoiding. "I can't run a billion-dollar company from Aspen," Emma said. "Not full-time. The board would revolt." "I know, but I could split time. 2 weeks in New York, 2 weeks here, or 3 in 1. We could experiment with the structure." "What about Sophie's schedule? She's with her mother every other week." Emma pulled up a calendar. "So on your weeks with Sophie, I'm here. On Claire's weeks, I'm in New York. It's not perfect, but it's a start." She nodded, chewing her lip. "I'll need to hire a deputy CEO, Someone who can handle day-to-day operations when I'm remote. That alone will take months. So we're talking long-term. Is that okay? I reached across the table, taking her hand. Emma, I've waited 20 years. I can wait a few more months. Her eyes glistened. I don't want to wait anymore. I've waited enough. Then we don't wait. We start now, messily, imperfectly. We figure it out as we go. You make it sound simple. It's not. But the alternative is going back to being empty. And I can't do that again. She squeezed my hand. Neither can I. Friday morning came too fast. Emma packed her small suitcase. She'd been living in borrowed clothes and toiletries all week, while Sophie made her promise to come back soon. When? Sophie asked, arms crossed, surprisingly fierce. 2 weeks, Emma said. I promise. I'll come back in 2 weeks. You better. Dad will be sad if you don't. I'll be sad too. I drove Emma to the Denver airport, Sophie insisting on coming along. The drive was quiet, each of us lost in thought. At the departure's curb, Emma hugged Sophie first, whispering something in her ear that made my daughter nod seriously. Then she turned to me. 2 weeks, she said. I'll be counting. We kissed there on the sidewalk, travelers rushing past us with their rolling luggage and their hurried lives. When we pulled apart, Emma's eyes were wet. This is going to work, she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a statement or a question. Yes, I said firmly. It is. She got out of the car, grabbed her suitcase, and walked toward the sliding doors. She turned back once, waved, then disappeared inside. Sophie moved to the front seat, buckling in. You okay, Dad? Yeah, I think so. She'll come back. How do you know? Sophie gave me a look that was far too wise. Because she looks at you the way you look at her. Like you're both finally where you're supposed to be. Out of the mouths of babes. We drove home through snow flurries, the mountains rising in the distance, solid and permanent. The cabin would feel empty tonight, but in 2 weeks it would be full again, and this time I knew exactly what I was fighting for. Not safety, not approval, not what made sense on paper, but the thing that made everything else make sense. The thing I should have chosen 20 years ago. The thing I was finally brave enough to choose now. Love. Real, messy, terrifying, hopeful love. And for the first time in 2 decades, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The snow kept falling, covering the world in white. Inside the car, Sophie hummed along to the radio, and I drove us home through the winter wonderland, thinking about second chances and promises kept and all the ways a single moment could change everything. Emma's letter was still on my desk. I'd read it a dozen times since she left. The words I'd written at 17, promising to find her if we were both still empty at 40. I wasn't empty anymore. Neither was she, and that was worth every scary step forward. Worth the hard conversations ahead. Worth restructuring our lives around something as fragile and powerful as hope. The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney. Home. Dad? Sophie said as we pulled into the driveway. Yeah? I'm proud of you. My throat tightened. Thanks, sweetheart. Mom's going to be weird about this. Probably. But she'll get over it. She wants you to be happy too. I hope so. We went inside, the house warm and welcoming despite Emma's absence. Sophie went straight to the kitchen to make hot chocolate, a tradition we'd started years ago. I stood in the living room, looking at the space Emma had occupied for a week. Her coffee mug was still in the sink. Her bookmark was on the side table, holding her place in a thriller she'd been reading. Small signs that she'd been here, that this wasn't a dream. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Landed in New York. The penthouse feels like a museum. I miss your terrible coffee already. I smiled, typing back. 2 weeks, 13 days, 17 hours. But who's counting? Sophie appeared with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, handing me one. Was that her? Yeah, good. You're smiling again. Was I? I touched my face, surprised. I guess I am. We sat by the fire, the snow falling outside, the future uncertain but bright. There would be challenges ahead, logistics to work out, families to navigate, a 10-year-old to co-parent while building a relationship across state lines. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid of the challenge, because on the other side of it was Emma, and that made every difficult step worth taking. The fire crackled. Sophie leaned against my shoulder, and I realized that this right here, right now, was what I'd been missing all along. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of something worth fighting for. The snow continued falling into the night, covering the world in clean, white possibility. And I felt more alive than I had in 2 decades. Hope, it turned out, was the best medicine for an empty heart, and mine was finally beautifully full.